Wayne Gretzky is one of the greatest athletes who ever lived. 4 Stanley Cups, 9 Hart trophies, over 2,800 career points, records that may never be broken. For more than 20 years, he became one of the biggest names in professional sports. Then, a racehorse came along. It didn't compete for 20 years. It didn't race 100 times. In fact, it raced only 6 times. Yet, by the time it retired, it was valued at around $184 million, more than one of hockey's greatest legends. Not because it raced longer, not because it won more championships, because in just 18 months, it convinced some of the smartest investors in horse racing that it could become one of the most valuable stallions in history. This is the story of Flightline. Long before he became one of the most valuable racehorses on Earth, Flightline was simply another foal born on a Kentucky farm. He entered the world on March 14, 2018 at Summer Win Farm. Every year, thousands of thoroughbreds are born across Kentucky. Nearly all of them share the same dream. One day, they might run in the Kentucky Derby. Very few ever get close. Even fewer become champions. Flightline had an impressive pedigree. His sire was Tappet, one of North America's most successful stallions. By the time Flightline was born, Tappet had already produced Belmont Stakes winners, Breeders' Cup champions, and countless Grade 1 winners. Breeders knew exactly what Tappet could produce: speed, power, stamina. His dam, Feathered, had also shown talent on the racetrack. She competed at the highest level and finished second in the Grade 1 American Oaks. Her racing career wasn't legendary, but she possessed qualities breeders valued. When those bloodlines came together, people noticed. Still, horse racing has a way of humbling even the best pedigrees. Every year, expensive horses fail. Million-dollar yearlings never win major races. Perfect bloodlines don't guarantee greatness. Eventually, Flightline entered the sales ring. Unlike many future champions, he wasn't sold for millions. The winning bid reached $1 million. That certainly wasn't cheap. But in the modern thoroughbred market, 7-figure yearlings aren't especially rare. Several horses sell for more than that every single year. Some never win a race. Others disappear almost immediately. At the time, nobody believed they had just purchased a horse that might one day be worth nearly 200 times that amount. The colt was purchased by a partnership led by Racehorse Racing, with additional ownership that would eventually include several well-known racing operations. Unlike a single billionaire buying a horse outright, Flightline's ownership would become a partnership of experienced investors. Each believed the colt possessed unusual potential. Now they needed someone capable of turning that potential into victories. For that, they chose one of America's most respected trainers, John Sadler. By then, Sadler had already built an outstanding career. He had trained hundreds of winners, captured major races across North America, and earned a reputation as one of California's finest horsemen. Yet despite decades of success, one achievement had continued to elude him for years: finding a truly once-in-a-generation horse. Flightline might change that. When the young colt arrived at Sadler's barn, he didn't immediately become a superstar. In fact, one of the first things everyone noticed was how immature he looked. He was tall, lean, still growing. Like many young thoroughbreds, his body hadn't completely caught up with his bloodlines. There was no reason to rush him. Sadler preferred patience. The trainer often believed that allowing a horse extra time to develop physically could make all the difference later. Instead of chasing early headlines, he focused on building confidence. Strong workouts, steady progress, no shortcuts. Months passed. As Flightline matured, exercise riders started saying something unusual. The colt wasn't just fast, he was almost effortless. Some horses needed encouragement every step of the way. Flightline seemed to glide. He covered enormous stretches of ground with every stride, yet he rarely looked like he was trying. Morning workouts became more impressive, then even more impressive. Before long, other trainers at Santa Anita Park had begun asking the same question: who was this horse? Rumors spread quietly around the backside. Some clockers believed they were watching the fastest young horse in California. Others urged caution. Brilliant morning workouts don't always translate into victories. Horse racing is full of morning champions. The real test comes when the starting gates open. John Sadler wasn't interested in hype. He resisted pressure to debut Flightline too early. The colt continued training, growing stronger, learning, developing. Nearly 3 years passed before Flightline finally made his first start. For many owners, waiting that long would have been frustrating. Not for this group. If they had learned anything about Flightline, it was that he was worth waiting for. His debut came on April 24, 2021, at Santa Anita Park. There wasn't enormous national attention, no television special, no packed grandstand waiting to witness history. Just another maiden race, featuring another expensive young thoroughbred trying to prove he belonged. As the gates opened, Flightline broke cleanly. Within seconds, something became obvious. He was moving differently. His stride looked longer, smoother, almost effortless. The further the race continued, the larger the gap became. By the time he reached the finish line, he had won by more than 13 lengths. It wasn't just a victory, it was domination. People watching from the grandstand looked at one another. Clockers checked their watches. Television analysts immediately began discussing the performance. Could this really have been his first race? John Sadler remained careful. One incredible performance doesn't make a legend. Plenty of horses have looked brilliant once, only to disappoint later. Still, inside the barn, everyone knew they had witnessed something special. The question wasn't whether Flightline could win races. The question was, just how good could he become? Because if his debut had been a glimpse of the future, horse racing was about to meet a horse unlike anything it had seen in years. Flightline's debut lasted less than 2 minutes, but it was enough to make the racing world pay attention. Winning a maiden race by more than 13 lengths isn't something people simply forget. Still, one incredible performance doesn't prove greatness. Horse racing has seen plenty of brilliant debuts. The real question is always the same. Can they do it again? Nearly 2 months later, Flightline returned to Santa Anita Park. This time, the expectations were much higher. Everyone wanted to know if the first race had been a fluke. His opponents certainly hoped so. As the gates opened, Flightline once again broke sharply. Jockey Flavian Pratt barely asked him for speed. He didn't need to. Within a few strides, Flightline had separated himself from the field. The race quickly became familiar. Every horse behind him was trying to catch up. None of them could. He crossed the finish line more than 12 lengths in front. 2 races, 2 dominant victories. Combined winning margin, more than 25 lengths. The conversations became louder. People weren't asking whether Flightline was talented anymore. They were asking how high he could climb. John Sadler, however, refused to rush things. Many trainers would have entered a horse like Flightline in every major race they could find. Sadler wasn't interested in building hype. He wanted to build a champion. Instead of chasing every opportunity, he chose patience. Months passed before Flightline raced again. For fans, the wait felt endless. For the ownership group, it was simply part of the plan. When Flightline finally returned in September 2021, he entered the Grade 1 Run Happy Del Mar Futurity. No, that wasn't right. Flightline was already 3 years old. Instead, his next start came in the Grade 1 Run Happy Malibu Stakes, held at Santa Anita Park on December 26, 2021. It would be his first attempt at the Grade 1 level. The competition was significantly stronger than anything he had faced before. Many horses dominate allowance races. Grade 1 races are different. They feature the very best. Champions, future stallions, some of the fastest horses in the country. If Flightline truly belonged among racing's elite, this was where he had to prove it. As the gates opened, nothing changed. Flightline immediately took control. Flavian Pratt sat quietly in the saddle. There was no frantic urging, no desperate whipping, just confidence. Around the far turn, the race was already over. Flightline accelerated as though the other horses had stopped running. When he crossed the finish line, he had won by more than 11 lengths. Against Grade 1 competition, television commentators struggled to describe what they had witnessed. One analyst simply laughed, not because the race was funny, because it was unbelievable. Elite racehorses aren't supposed to embarrass other elite racehorses. Flightline had just done exactly that. His speed figure immediately became one of the highest recorded in North America that year. The racing world exploded with excitement. Articles appeared across every major racing publication. Former trainers praised him. Hall of Fame jockeys called him extraordinary. Fans began comparing him to some of the greatest horses they'd ever seen. Those comparisons made John Sadler uncomfortable. He reminded reporters that Flightline had raced only 3 times. Greatness isn't earned overnight, but privately, even Sadler admitted he'd never trained anything quite like him. Then came another obstacle. In early 2022, Flightline suffered a minor foot issue during training. It wasn't career-threatening, but it was enough to delay his return. Once again, Sadler chose patience over publicity. The ownership group agreed. There would be no rushing. A horse this valuable wasn't worth risking for one race. That decision frustrated some fans. People wanted to see Flightline compete every month. Instead, they waited. When he finally returned in June 2022, he entered one of America's most prestigious races, the Grade 1 Metropolitan Handicap, better known as the Met Mile, at Belmont Park. Unlike his previous races, this one carried enormous expectations. The Met Mile has been won by many of the greatest horses in American history. Winning it isn't easy. Winning it easily is almost unheard of. As the field loaded into the gate, many wondered whether the long layoff would finally slow Flightline down. The answer came almost immediately. Braking sharply once again, Flightline settled comfortably near the lead. His rivals stayed close during the opening stages. For a moment, it actually looked competitive. Then Flavien Prat gave Flightline a little more rein. The response was instant, within seconds. The race was over. He exploded away from the field. Every stride created more separation. By the finish line, Flightline had won by 6 lengths against another field of Grade 1 winners. The margin wasn't the most impressive part. It was how easy he made it look. Prat barely celebrated. He almost looked surprised himself. Later, he admitted that riding Flightline felt different from riding any horse he'd ever been on. The colt possessed acceleration that simply didn't seem possible. Now the conversation changed again. People stopped asking whether Flightline was the best horse in America. Many began asking whether he might be one of the best horses of the modern era. Magazine covers featured his photo. Television analysts debated where he ranked. Attendance at his races increased. Fans planned trips months in advance just to watch him run. And with every dominant victory, another number quietly kept rising. His value. Remember, Flightline had already been purchased for $1 million. That seemed like a huge investment. Now, industry experts were beginning to estimate that his future breeding rights alone could be worth tens of millions. Some believed $50 million. Others thought $75 million. A few whispered numbers even higher. The owners weren't talking. John Sadler wasn't talking. But everyone understood the reality. Every time Flightline won, he became more valuable. Every time he stepped onto a racetrack, he also risked everything. One injury could erase tens of millions of dollars overnight. That created an impossible question. How long do you keep racing? When every victory makes retirement even more profitable, the answer would come sooner than anyone expected, because Flightline was about to produce a performance that would completely change how much people believed he was worth. By the summer of 2022, Flightline had raced only 4 times, yet many people already believed they were watching the best horse in America. That statement carried enormous weight. Every year, dozens of champions compete across the United States. Winning one Grade 1 race is difficult. Winning several is extraordinary. Winning every race by open lengths almost never happens. Still, there were skeptics. Some argued Flightline hadn't faced enough competition. Others pointed out that he had raced only 4 times. Great horses proved themselves over years, not months. John Sadler understood those concerns. He also knew exactly where Flightline needed to go next. The Pacific Classic at Del Mar. The Pacific Classic wasn't just another Grade 1 race. It brought together older horses, proven champions, millionaire racehorses. This wasn't a field of inexperienced 3-year-olds. These were horses that had already built impressive careers. If Flightline dominated here, there would be very little left to prove. On September 3rd, 2022, more than 20,000 fans packed Del Mar. Many weren't there because of the race itself. They were there because they wanted to see Flightline. As he walked through the paddock, cameras followed his every move. The pressure couldn't have been higher. Some horses struggle when expectations become overwhelming. Flightline never seemed to notice. When the gates opened, he broke cleanly once again. For the first few seconds, everything looked normal. Several horses challenged for the lead. Then, halfway down the backstretch, Flightline simply accelerated, not gradually, instantly. Within a matter of strides, the field began disappearing behind him. The crowd could hardly believe what they were watching. Around the final turn, the race was already finished. The only remaining question was, by how much? Jockey Flavian Pratt barely moved. He wasn't desperately urging Flightline forward. He was simply allowing him to run. Every stride increased the gap. 5 lengths, 10 lengths, 15 lengths. Commentators almost stopped calling the race. Instead, they simply reacted because there wasn't another horse close enough to describe. When Flightline crossed the finish line, the official margin was 19 1/4 lengths, one of the largest winning margins ever recorded in a Grade 1 race against elite competition. Del Mar erupted. Fans stood and applauded. Some simply laughed in disbelief. Others stared at the giant video board, wondering if they had just witnessed one of the greatest performances in modern horse racing. Even veteran trainers admitted they had rarely seen anything like it. Speed figures were released in the days that followed. Flightline earned one of the highest ratings of the modern era. Immediately, comparisons began. Secretariat, Spectacular Bid, Ghost Zapper, American Pharaoh. The racing world couldn't help itself. Whenever a horse appears this dominant, people naturally begin comparing generations. John Sadler tried to stay grounded. He reminded everyone that every great horse raced in different eras, against different competition. Comparisons were impossible, but privately. Even he admitted that Flightline was unlike anything he had ever trained. The Pacific Classic changed something else: money. Remember those earlier estimates? Some experts believed Flightline might eventually be worth $50 million. Others guessed $75 million. After Del Mar, those numbers exploded. Industry insiders began discussing valuations that sounded almost unbelievable. $100 million. Then even higher. It wasn't because Flightline had earned that much in prize money. He hadn't. It was because investors were now imagining what kind of stallion he could become. Every dominant performance increased confidence. Every victory suggested he might pass those extraordinary traits to future generations. In thoroughbred racing, that's where the real fortunes are made. Yet one race still remained: the Breeders' Cup Classic. If the Kentucky Derby is America's most famous race, the Breeders' Cup Classic is often considered the championship event for older horses. The very best meet one final time, win there, and your place among racing's elite is almost guaranteed. Lose, and people begin asking difficult questions. Could Flightline handle the pressure? Could he defeat another championship-caliber field? Or had the Pacific Classic simply made him look better than he really was? On November 5th, 2022, the answers arrived. Keeneland Racecourse was packed. Television cameras from around the world focused on one horse. Flightline entered as the overwhelming favorite. Anything less than victory would shock the racing world. The gates opened. For one brief moment, Flightline actually looked vulnerable. He found himself in a speed duel early with Life is Good, one of the fastest horses in America. The opening fractions were demanding. Some wondered if Flightline had gone too fast. Most horses can't maintain that pace. Approaching the far turn, Life is Good finally began to tire. Flightline didn't. Instead, he found another gear. Flavian Pratt asked for more. Flightline answered immediately. Within seconds, the race belonged to him. He powered away from the field and crossed the finish line 8 1/4 lengths in front. Another Grade 1. Another dominant victory. Still undefeated. 6 races. 6 wins. The crowd erupted once again. John Sadler finally allowed himself to smile. Years of patience had produced something incredibly rare. Not just a champion, a horse many believed would be remembered for generations. Soon afterward, Flightline was named 2022 Horse of the Year. He also received the Eclipse Award as Champion Older Dirt Male. There was very little left to accomplish on the racetrack, which left his owners with one enormous decision: keep racing and risk everything, or retire and unlock a fortune almost impossible to imagine? The answer would make Flightline one of the most valuable horses in racing history. By the end of 2022, Flightline had done everything a racehorse could do. He had never lost. He had won 6 races, captured 4 Grade 1 victories, won the Breeders' Cup Classic, been named Horse of the Year, and done it all in less than 2 years. For most owners, the next question would have been simple. Race again. Keep winning. Earn more prize money. But Flightline wasn't like most racehorses. Every time he stepped onto the track, he risked something far more valuable than a winner's purse, his future. Because by now, investors weren't looking at Flightline as a racehorse. They were looking at him as a stallion. In thoroughbred racing, the greatest fortunes are almost never made on the racetrack. They're made in the breeding shed. When a champion retires, breeding farms and investors often purchase shares in the horse. This process is called syndication. Instead of one owner keeping the entire horse, ownership is divided into shares. Each shareholder receives breeding rights and shares in the horse's future value. It's one of the biggest businesses in horse racing. And in Flightline's case, the numbers became almost unbelievable. Shortly after his Breeders' Cup victory, Flightline was syndicated at a valuation of approximately $184 million. That made him one of the most valuable racehorses ever retired to stud. To put that into perspective, Wayne Gretzky spent 20 seasons becoming hockey's greatest player. He won 4 Stanley Cups, 9 MVP awards, scored more points than anyone in NHL history. Yet during his playing career, he earned far less in NHL salary than Flightline's reported valuation after just 6 races. Think about that for a second. One of the greatest hockey players ever needed 2 decades. Flightline needed less than 2 years. That's almost impossible to imagine. But the investors weren't paying for what Flightline had already done. They were paying for what they believed he would do next. Every breeding season, elite mares from across the country would come to him. Owners would pay enormous stud fees, hoping the next champion would carry Flightline's blood. If his offspring inherited even part of his speed, the investment could eventually repay itself many times over. Of course, there were no guarantees. Horse racing has seen brilliant racehorses become disappointing stallions. It has also seen average racehorses produce champions. Nobody truly knows how successful a stallion will become until years later. That's what made Flightline's valuation such an incredible gamble. The investors weren't buying certainty, they were buying possibility. Today, Flightline stands at Lane's End Farm in Kentucky, one of the most respected breeding farms in the world. Every breeding season, mares arrive from across North America. Each one represents another chance to produce the next great champion. His first foals have already begun arriving. Now the racing world waits. Can Flightline become as successful in the breeding shed as he was on the racetrack? Only time will answer that question. But regardless of what happens next, his racing career is already complete. 6 starts, 6 victories, 4 Grade 1 wins, Horse of the Year, Breeders' Cup Classic champion, and one of the highest-rated dirt racehorses of the modern era. It's almost difficult to believe. Most legendary horses spend years building a reputation. Secretariat raced 16 times. American Pharoah raced 11. Justify raced 6, but accomplished the Triple Crown. Flightline also raced only 6 times. Yet every appearance felt like an event. Every victory made headlines. Every performance convinced more people they were watching something extraordinary. Perhaps that's why his story is so fascinating. Not because he raced the longest, not because he won the most races, but because he accomplished so much in so little time. When Flightline retired, there were still fans hoping to see him race one more season, to challenge more champions, to answer even more questions. His owners made a different decision. One more injury, one bad step, one unfortunate race could have changed everything. Instead, they retired him at the absolute peak of his career. Some people believed it was too soon. Others believed it was the smartest business decision in modern horse racing. Looking back, it's hard to argue with the numbers. A horse purchased for $1 million, went undefeated, became Horse of the Year, and retired with an estimated value of $184 million. Few investments in sports history have appreciated that quickly. And that's what makes Flightline different from almost every other champion. He wasn't just one of the fastest horses in America. He became one of the most valuable, a racehorse, worth more than Wayne Gretzky's playing career, a horse whose greatest payday didn't come after winning the Breeders' Cup. It came the moment he stopped racing, because in thoroughbred racing, the finish line isn't always the end of the story. Sometimes, it's where the biggest fortune begins.